Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, we're going to have a wide-range discussion with a retired Brigadier General about everything from China to the economy to the recent collapse of the Texas power grid. That's next.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, I've had a lot of powerful people in my studio, but I can't think of a person more decorated than my next guest, retired General Rob Spalding. He's retired from the U.S. Air Force. Thank you for your service, first of all.
Thank you.
And your breadth of knowledge is just incredible. And so as we were preparing for the show, I was saying, what can you talk about? He says, I can talk about a lot of stuff. And what I want to start with is the power grid. Because that was, to me, kind of a national embarrassment for Texas. How could we collapse like that?
Well, I think, first of all, before we talk about Texas, let's just talk about infrastructure in America. We haven't invested in 30 years. One of the things that I found as I was focused on this competition between the U.S. and China and really focused on our current national security strategy is a thing that we haven't done in the last 30 years. We've been fighting a lot of wars. We haven't invested in our country. I know for a fact that there was at least 2 or 3 private investment on grid-related large infrastructure projects in Texas that had been stymied by the federal bureaucracy. So whether it's transportation, whether it has to do with the grid, whether it has to do with our ports and the areas by our ports, we haven't invested in anything. And one of the reasons we've had a stagnant economy is because we haven't invested in our country. We spend a lot on weapon systems. It might be crazy to hear an Air Force general talk about we're buying too many airplanes and subs and tanks, but that's what we're doing, and we're not investing in our country. Now, we saw some peculiar issues with regard to the Texas grid in terms of its closed ecosystem, but it is a general trend in the United States that we haven't invested in 30 years.
And 30 years, and this is Republican and Democrat administrations. So what do you think it is? Why are we not putting more emphasis on this?
So during the Cold War, democracies banded together and we really closed our economies off from these authoritarian regimes. And when we did, we tended to invest in our own science and technology, in our own manufacturing and industrial-based infrastructure, STEM education. What happened at the end of the Cold War, we thought, okay, we're going to open everything up. These authoritarian regimes will come into the international order and they will become more like us. In actuality, what they've done is raided our innovation, our technology, our talent, and capital. They've destroyed our working class, and they've actually turned us more like them. If you think about cancel culture, if you think about critical race theory, it's all related to this decline in the economic opportunity of America, and that has a direct tie to the lack of investment in ourselves that has come as a result of globalization and the global internet.
Well, so it's no surprise to me why you're a best-selling author and speaker and are always quoted in the media. We found a video, I'm going to call it This Is Your Life, General Spalding. Let's go ahead and roll that now.
Hi, my name is Rob Spalding, but most people know me as General Spalding. Even though I was in the Air Force for 27 years, I really never thought I'd be a general. I'm a patriot, a strategist, and an entrepreneur. Today, I don't do anything different than when I was in uniform. I try to support and defend the Constitution and protect the country and people I love. I was a B-52 and a B-2 pilot while in the Air Force, but I had the opportunity to live in China with my family. I was an Olmsted scholar and I studied in Shanghai. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time in my life. This led to the last part of my career where I focused on U.S.-China competition. first at the Pentagon, then in Beijing as a senior defense official, and finally as a senior director for strategy at the White House, where I shaped the current national security strategy. Today, national security is more about ones and zeros and dollars and cents than bombs and bullets. These are the threats we face. Join me on my journey as I reveal the plan to take back our country and defend our people.
You're very inspiring. I have to ask you about leadership, because I've got to believe all of those years of military service really taught you a lot. Do you remember have you always been a born leader?
No, the military really was a crucible for me to, one of my superpowers is I don't like authority and I don't like rules. One of the things that the military did was teach me discipline, the importance of discipline, the importance of being focused in attaining a goal, and then working with a team. So I think I credit a lot of who I've become to the Air Force and the 30 years I spent in the military, and really worked with some of the finest people that America has to offer.
Do you remember in the early days of being a leader in the military, you had to be very young, and you were sometimes maybe leading people who were older than you. Was that strange?
Well, actually, it's kind of the opposite. When you're a young lieutenant, what happens is if you're lucky, you get some crusty old senior non-commissioned officers that really take you under their wing. If they like you, if they trust you, if they believe in you, then they give you the skills that you need to really lead. So it's funny, but really in the military, in our military in particular, and this is what distinguishes us from other militaries around the world, even like of our adversaries, is the senior non-commissioned officers really provide a great deal of inspiration and teaching to our young officers. So my great benefit was having people like that in my very early days that could teach me really what leadership was about. So you don't go in knowing these things.
Yes.
People that believe in you lend their experience to you, and if you use that, if you listen, if you're humble, then you can take something with it.
I love it. Well, speaking of leadership, we've got a new administration, and we've got this issue with China. And I know you're very passionate about this. You've written a best-selling book. Let's go ahead and put the cover up. Stealth War: How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. Tell us about the book.
So my role in the Air Force was as a B-2 pilot. And I had this wonderful opportunity to go and live in China. So I went and studied Chinese. I lived in Shanghai for 2 years with my family. We traveled the country. I spoke to the people. I learned the culture, the language, the geography, the history of China. And that really set me on a path apart from my peers to be focused on China. And so when everybody else went to the Middle East, I went to China. Well, what happened was towards the end of my career, the Air Force began to groom me to be the senior defense official in China. And so that led to a series of assignments that really brought me into this national security and foreign policy making process. And through that, I really began to study closely the relationship between China and the United States. And more importantly, began to realize through my interactions with the business community, because I'd spent a year as part of this process living in New York City as a senior military fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, met industry leaders, business leaders, financial leaders, and I began to see that this relationship was having a very bad effect on our own economy, our own industrial base, and that began this process of discovery that led to a lot of what we see today with regard to tariffs. All of that began not in 2017 when President Trump came in. It was begun by me and a small group of China experts within the Pentagon starting in 2014 to really explore that. Now, President Trump was the first to actually enable the work that we had done to really be brought to light and really change the structure of our national security and foreign policy. The book that I wrote, Stealth War, was detailing that process of discovery that me and my team went through.
I think one of the scariest things that happened during the pandemic for most Americans is we realized how much we rely on China for manufacturing, even the drugs that we take and all the components in the cars we drive. That's got to be a wake-up call. What do we do about that?
Well, I mean, that's important, and it is a wake-up call, but I think what people don't know is that the first report to come out of the coronavirus that said 2 million Americans were going to die, that report came out of Imperial College of London. Now, who do you think made a trip to Imperial College of London in 2015 to give them a bunch of money to do epidemiology research? Xi Jinping.
Wow.
The chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. When you begin to unpack the influence on our society, corporate, academic, political, social, financial, what you see is across these areas, the Chinese Communist Party has began to create a subtle influence over the way we do policy making, the way we do transactions, the way we finance things, the way we invest in things, or in the case of infrastructure, don't invest in things. There's a tie between and it was really bringing them into the system, and they began to use that. What I didn't realize, and what I think most people would like to know, is that the policies that we implemented as a result of the coronavirus can almost all, to a T, be traced back to the Chinese Communist Party, whether it be lockdowns, whether it be mandatory social distancing and masks. You know, before I got on the plane to fly out here to Dallas, I heard about Governor Abbott saying, I'm going to open things up. Well, you know what? Taiwan, which is 80 miles across the Taiwan Strait from China, all Chinese people, but a free and democratic China, they never locked down. They never had mandatory masks. They never had mandatory social distancing. And I'll tell you what, they've fared better than any country in the world with regard to the coronavirus. And so you have to ask yourself, we're a free country. UK is a free country. Europe is mostly free. Why did all these democracies take on the policies of an authoritarian regime and not mirror the policies of democratic China? This is a challenge that really is talked about in my book, Stealth War. And if you read it, you begin to understand the subtle influence that bringing them into the globalized system really created.
Yes. Okay, well, we've got about 2 minutes left, so let's talk about the economy. What do you see for the rest of 2021?
Well, if you saw Secretary Blinken's recent foreign policy speech, what you saw is a doubling down on Trump national security and foreign policy. It's not a repudiation of it. In fact, it's an instantiation within the federal bureaucracy of this recognition of China as a great strategic competitor. Now, how do we fight China? First of all, we're not going to war with China because they've got nuclear weapons and it would be insane to do so. So how do we really fight China? Well, we fight China the same way we fought the Soviet Union, by investing in ourselves, infrastructure, manufacturing, science and technology, STEM education, rather than having 152,000 Chinese kids in our university. Like when my kid went to Mizzou, he was the only kid in computer science, all the rest were Chinese nationals. Having American kids in there. We had national security for STEM education during the Cold War. So it's really about reinvesting in ourselves again. And as we rise in economic power again, and as Americans become economically prosperous, the rest of the world begins to look at America and say, oh, this democracy stuff, it works. It works far better than the regime in China would have you believe.
General Spalding, you have been such an inspiration. Thank you for coming on my show. We're going to end with your website. GeneralSpalding.com is the website. Thank you so much for sharing your heart and your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
You bet. That's it for now. We'll see you next time.